We have a smaller group today. Our focus is profiling, and on the agenda for today, we've really got two items. We tried really, really hard to get the formalization of the motion that was recommended a number of weeks back on the docket in the last profiling call, but we ran out of time. I'd really like, if it's possible, to refresh that motion. I know Elliot isn't on and he was the one that originally raised it, but given that we have quite a lot of documentation on what was originally desired, and now we've got essentially the process put in place for deprecation. It would be awesome if we can just go through the actual formality of finalizing that motion and the vote for it for removal of our tobacco smoking status profile. And then we had also been doing quite a bit of work on the profiling stream around modifying some of the invariants that were misplaced, and also maybe a bit overly severe around UCOM. And we had done it in our observation results profile at the value level, and we had noted that we wanted to return and have a conversation, the same one around application, the component value level. So those are the two items I've got on the agenda today. Lori, I saw that you're stepping away for a minute or two. What I want to just do is...
Okay, I'll pause. I just desperately need coffee.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, go grab your coffee. We're gonna just look at the motion around deprecation, and then when you're back, we'll see if folks want to do a call for a refresh of the motion.
Yes, okay, because I've heard it several times. So
yeah.
And Sheridan, I'm in favor of this being changed, so I'm not altering that. But just to clarify, I just saw an email, I believe, the beginning of the week, that the deprecation policy was in fact going out for review.
For HL7 Canada.
Yes.
Yep. So we agreed on the deprecation policy for CA baseline, and then also put forward that as a recommendation for HL7 Canada to adopt more broadly.
So who's we?
The Canada baseline put forward a motion on the HL7 Canada council call for the council to consider uplifting the CA baseline deprecation process that we just went through.
Yes, and the motion is around removal of the smoking status policy.
Yes, for today, the baseline's motion.
Okay, I'm sorry, Sharon. I don't mean to be a pain here, but I'm still not understanding who we is.
So the deprecation policy, and I'll pull it up real quick, that the CA baseline profiling and governance call have been going through for the past month and a half. Let me actually see if I have the policy.
Okay. And that group is under what auspices? That's under InfoWave.
Sorry,
or is that HL7 Canada?
It's the CA baseline, which meets under the FHIR implementers group, which can only govern the content of the CA baseline. So we've developed a process for our own internal governance. We think it's pretty good, and therefore we're recommending it to another group, HL7 Canada, for utilization. And so when it comes to governing our own materials, we have a deprecation process in place that we've all kind of agreed on utilizing. And we have a outstanding motion on the utilization of that deprecation process to remove a CA baseline profile from the CA baseline implementation guide. So from that sense, even though it's out for review with HL7 Canada, it's already an approved process that we voted on and adopted from a CA baseline perspective. But HL7 Canada obviously needs to provide its own window for a larger set of folks that live outside the baseline that haven't been talking about it for the last 2 months.
Yeah, because the baseline doesn't fall underneath any SDO, right?
Correct.
Good.
So, and I'm just going to zoom in just real quick. So this is the deprecation. It should look familiar to folks. I think just about everybody has been on the calls that we've been kind of going through it. So this is the one that we voted and formalized on the governance call 3 weeks ago. Because we didn't have the governance call 1 week ago. that effectively says, here's our decision tree for when content is at this level of publication and this level of maturity, what our processes are going to be for removal, deprecation, and any of the secondary activities surrounding it. So, you know, in addition to, do we apply deprecated flag, the process covers things like, do we need to also put a note in the release log, or do we need to consult with the community, depending on how far along or how long and how mature the content has been exposed for. So this is the one that, from a CA baseline perspective, are deprecation processes and protocols. We had, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, and there's no documentation here as to how this differs from the FHIR deprecation process.
So I think when we've talked about it on previous calls, the important note, because we did spend probably a session or two reviewing the FHIR process, is that it's oriented around what you should do about normative content, but not necessarily around what you should do about non-normative content, which, so if we were thinking about what this looks like from what's available in FHIR and HL7, that's effectively what's in green. But some of the details around how do we want to act as a community when our content is draft and when it hasn't been published, or when it's mid-level maturity but hasn't been published, that isn't governed by HL7. This is the details that we came up with.
Well, that looks to me amazingly like the eventually developed in FMG to 5 at HL7.
Maybe we looked in different places, but I think when we were looking at the HL7 materials,
Okay,
deprecation
well,
notes
I'll
were
be taking a look at that when
Yeah.
and commenting back on the stuff that's out.
perfect. Yeah, that would be super
Okay.
helpful, because we obviously there's still kind of this window for evaluation within the HL7 Canada auspices. If you know, to just effectively appropriately tag, hey, this is maybe this green box is actually like this. I'm not sure, but when we looked at it, this is where we were able to kind of identify guidance around
Yeah,
deprecation.
the guidance of having to consult the community for FMN 4 and 5 is absolutely there in FMP.
This one. Like that. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I served on FMG for about 8 years as well. That's why I know it's always rare. But yeah, I'll look into the specifics and then comment on that.
Perfect. So where we sit right now, we have content that I'll bring up the previous motion. I think we're going to have to refresh it and make sure, because we said it was pending because effectively we had this tobacco use profile, and in the baseline we had previously discussed that based on our principles and kind of the intent of the baseline, that the tobacco use profile was more use case driven and more constrained than the rest of the profiles that were intended in our subset. And because we didn't necessarily have a reason to have a base, right, for this, and we don't necessarily have like an international smoking status profile that we would be localizing for Canadian use, the group had voted to say, we think it should be removed in some fashion, but when this was originally put forward, we actually didn't have the process and the protocols for, well, do we remove it? Do we have to notice deprecated for some portion of time? What do we say to the community? And ultimately that was the driver around the documentation of what our process would be, because we have this content that is early in its FMN level. However, we didn't have a documented baseline process for, you know, do we remove it on a major update? How do we tag it, etc. Particularly given the fact that we haven't officially published yet. So the way that the motion was, and it wasn't voted on, it was just put forward for us to return to. But the way it was put forward was that the intent was to remove the tobacco smoking status profile once we had agreement on the approach for how the removal would occur, you know, whether or not it would have a deprecation flag associated with it, if it had to be removed at a certain point in time. So basically, like, pending the overall approach being available and applied specifically to this profile. At this point in time, we now have the decision tree and the baseline to work through. And so with Elliot not being here, what I'm going to recommend, because it would be really, really nice to be able to make these changes as we make some of the others, is that we redo, see if someone wants to put forward either the same language or a modification of this language as a motion.
Just as a comment, if you're implementing something in FHIR and you intend to call it FHIR, then you're not simply implementing the data elements that you see in an object. You're actually following the process, and the process already says if it hasn't been validated, etc., there is no backwards compatibility requirement. So I appreciate you documenting, oh, we're going to leave a note in here or something, and I'm fine with removing it because that is exactly what FHIR says. So you don't actually need the deprecation rules. It's the deprecation rules have already been specified.
Yeah,
But I
and
completely agree with the motion.
yes, and the policy that we've discussed actually is consistent with the base FHIR policy. Anyway, and this is still at basically a draft status, so we don't, it behooves us, just like FHIR does, to have change logs and things, but we don't have to do deprecation or anything on this. So the motion is moving around here, so.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so I've got the
Yeah.
motion here. I just wanted to pull up to show the FMM level of this tobacco smoking status profile
But
individually.
in our material, we don't have FMM levels yet, do we?
We have profile maturity levels that are defined. Let me see. I think it's in guidance. Not guidance. 1 second. We said basically we use FMM and then we have applied in our governance structure. Here is the respective working group that will be responsible for evaluating.
Yeah, but regardless, we haven't actually validated anything yet.
We haven't. Nothing's been validated.
Yeah. Anyway, so as far as the motion goes, I would actually remove the pending piece.
Yep.
So I think that the motion that I would make to propose to modify is to remove the smoking status profile. As simple as that.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Now, unfortunately, sorry, I'm not looking at the screen. Is that much of an edit because we don't have Elliot? If necessary, we can, because Elliot's not here, we can take the motion out. I'd be happy to make a motion or
Yeah, I
second
think
the
we're
motion.
just gonna,
Exactly that.
ask for new motioners.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
It's in the spirit of what Elliot had, because the only other thing that was missing there was the pending approval stuff of the process.
All right, so motion as it's written is remove the smoking status profile from the CA baseline. Any tweaks that you would want to apply to the language before?
Is it removing a profile or is it removing an extension from
No, it's a profile.
profile?
It's a profile. The whole profile we want to get rid of, Paul.
Okay, but that profile must have been referenced somewhere too, right?
We have no idea whether it was referenced or not. We actually don't think it has been.
Oh, so it was just a profile that was added to the guide, but wasn't used in the guide.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So let's just see, it's observation tobacco smoking status profile. So it's a standalone, it's in the guide, it's in the simplifier project, with no cross dependencies in the guide. So the only other thing I can think of that would be an addition would be like end the profile page, because there's technically, I think, a page associated with it. Yeah. But really, it's the same gist. Lorraine, were you the one that was putting forward that as a primary motioner? Or was it Paul? Who wants to be, unless there's
Oh, I already made the motion, so Paul can second it if he wants.
Okay.
Sure, I'll second.
Okay. Is there any further discussion that folks want to have? Is there anyone that wants to abstain? All right, then it will carry. I think we've got, let's see, one outside of me, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, we will remove the profile and the profile page from the CA baseline because of its low maturity. I'm just going to check. I don't think we don't have to do consultation. Yep, removed entirely. Beautiful. All right.
Yes, and now as a consequence, we no longer have an inconsistency with CA Core Plus around this. Or with the patient summary, I mean, that's where the
Yes, yeah, because I don't actually think the Core Plus has the tobacco yet. Yep.
Correct.
Exactly. Yep. And really any downstream guides that want to be able to profile can maintain the profile over time.
Mhm.
All right. So that brings us, I think now that that's carried, it will get removed. I think the way that what we have up is got 1.2 that is coming next, and we have 2.0. I think it's going in 1.2 just based on the fact that it's not having to be removed on a major release. And this is all about the prep work that we need to accomplish before, on the actual profiles before things like canonical URL and QA cleanup in 2.0. So that is on. I will put is there anyone that wants to do, I'm just gonna put in the ticket against the resource real quick, or the profile real quick. And if there's anyone who wants to volunteer to actually do that removal in our GitHub repository, I will note you down in the ticket. Oh, of course, I'm not logged in. 1 second. Okay. Where is my issue? Definition of the removal, withdraw. Any volunteers? If not, I'll make a call again during our next profiling call for a volunteer. Removal of profile. All right. That one shouldn't be too hard, but I will circle back until we have some volunteers. All right, so I am going to then take us back into our next topic for the call. So we have been working in the observation invariant space for a number of calls, and I'll actually bring us to the change that we previously discussed for the observation results that we went forward with. We did excessive testing on, came up with the FHIR path that we actually desired, that met all of our expected kind of scenarios. And we've applied it to the value quantity slice. So I'll just walk folks through this because these would be the same types of changes that we would apply if we're happy with it to it in other locations on this profile. So effectively, we changed it from an error to a warning. And alongside that, updated the human. And then we changed the actual expression. And this was the one that was successful in all 3 scenarios, both like the traditional happy path, as well as the ones that we were trying to put intentional failures against. It was the one that we were comparing against met 2 of the 3 scenarios when we were testing using FHIR Path Lab, but not the 3rd one. And so we ended up putting this one forward. I just put some notes in here. So I just wanted to confirm we had moved the location of this. I think it used to be on system, and we had moved it up to value quantity slice. Before we move on to discussion around this on component, I just want to make sure. So the way that this is currently working is it's targeting both system and it's targeting the type of value. And so I think it makes sense on value quantity slice rather than upwards on really any value that could be provided. So like rather than being here. Is that others' understanding as well? Or do we think
Yes.
it actually should be applied not on the slice?
Yeah, no, I think it's on for the type of quantity, because the other value types don't necessarily have units.
Right. And system is too low, because if
Yeah.
no system is specified, then the invariant won't fire.
Yep. Okay. I just wasn't sure because we do nominate the type here if it mattered, but we know that it will successfully evaluate against the slice, which is good. Need to raise it higher to value X. Okay. And then we need to look at this. So basically I'll remove my commentary here. And we actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put it in our slides so that we remember where it was. And we will evaluate the same types of changes for the component value. And I had a peek. Originally, Elliot had posed if it wasn't applied to component already that we make that change, but I took a peek right before the call and confirmed that it was in fact something that was an invariant to begin with that needed to have that change. So I'm just gonna make sure I have all my closures. Okay. So we're going to take the same type of constraint and we're going to bring it down. So here's component value. And so I also have an example of one of these. So the first one that we have is an invariant on quotable concept. And then this is that funky one. So this is where we had placed the original one when we had placed the invariant that was misplaced in both locations, value quantity system and component value quantity system. So I'm going to bring this guy up just so we can look at him together. And we'll talk about how the FHIR path will have to change. Actually, let's bring him here. Okay. So this is what we'd be replacing. And we know that both the location and the FHIR path wasn't what we wanted. Oh, you know what, actually, before I say anything else, one thing that we had with the past expression that we don't have here is the X path. And I know we talked about like where it's possible to include the X path. I am not an X path writer. And so what I'm thinking is that like, because I think FHIR path is required and X path is recommended for backwards compatibility. If there is someone that wants to volunteer after we've made the update that removes the error to write the XPath for this, I would highly recommend it. I don't know if I can do it with where I'm currently at without a lot of troubleshooting.
Yeah, and again, we were going to remove XPath completely. And there were certain circumstances where there was legacy systems that were now being reflected into, and therefore the XPath would be more consumable by them. But when we're developing something net new, there isn't something to be backwards compatible with.
Okay, that's a relief because I was like, when it's simplistic, I'm like, okay, I can understand that based off of like the structure. But I think one of the things that when we introduced with this FHIR path expression, like there is kind of a lot of conditionality here that might take us some time to work through. So that's good to know that like, and if somebody is interested in doing it, it's still available to be able to write it. But given that this is net new, we're making modifications.
Well, yeah, I mean, at the time that we originally did this, FHIR path was a new concept. It hadn't gone normative yet, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas by the time we get to R6, we may very well remove XPath because that will be about 16 years after we started.
Yeah. All right, beautiful. So I don't have to worry about keeping this guy around. My other question is, I anticipate, because we are changing the location of this, that we might want to make this a distinct invariant. Is that other people's understanding as well? It's the same rule, but the actual expression is on a distinct location.
Sorry,
So the one above is CA baseline results 2. That's just applied on value. And the expression only targets value. When the rule, like the spirit of the rule is the same, but the actual FHIR path changes, do we have to change the key for the invariant?
I think I would. They're two
Yes.
different invariants because
Yeah.
one is
Yeah.
on the. Yeah.
Unless the invariant is exactly the same.
And in our case, it isn't, because it is getting applied elsewhere.
Right.
Okay. So then I've made this warning results 3. I'm just gonna make sure it doesn't come up anywhere else. Looks like that's the only place. These two would be the same because it's coded quantity units. And I think just this piece has to change. So I'm going to guess, I'm just going to put it out there. If this is component value of type quantity, is this component dot value, or let me just read this observation. And yeah, I think this is also has to change, right? Because if it's of type quantity and component value exists, I don't think it's picking, like it's not transversing the where statement, and we have to double up, right? We can also test it. I'm gonna like err on the side of caution and change it to component dot value in the majority of these places, and then I've got an actual example pulled up that we can test it with. So where the type of for value under component is quantity, then the component dot value is expected to exist. When that is true, it implies observation component value of quantity. Do I dot value exists, dot system exists? I don't think. Do I still have to? Yeah, okay. Component system exists and component value of type quantity. The system is units of measure.org. We're going to try it. We'll see what happens. Oops. So the one I've got pulled up, I have.
Hang on, sorry, the last term.
This one?
Component of system? Yeah, it's just a second here. Component of value of quantity. No, that's a quantity dot system, isn't it? That's below
Well,
component.
that's the part I was unclear of, because technically, yeah, it's quantity dot system, but in both of these, I added the component because we were adding it into component.
But it's what
I
you're
think you-
changing
Value
is
dot value.
observation value to observation dot component dot value.
Yes. And so you would need observation dot component dot value quantity dot system.
And then what about dot value as well? So first things first, we remove this,
Yeah.
right? And this.
Correct.
Do we
I think
also
that's-
remove this?
Just a second.
No. We already wrote a FHIR path constraint against observation dot value. We're now trying to write a constraint against observation dot component dot value. So I think we still need the component.
Yeah, I think we require it there, but not, and we require it in the line right below.
This one. Okay. And here. Like here, I'm pretty
Oh,
confident.
sorry. In the line above, I think it would disappear as well.
This one.
Type of quantity. Yeah, because you're
Because
already,
it's value dot value and
yeah,
value dot system already. Okay. So component value
I think
is
you have a
quantity.
space there where your cursor is, do you?
Nope.
That looks, yep. I think that looks right.
Okay, let's try it. Okay, so. And then I have this guy. This is an observation that has actually the human readable. A component quantity for GFR. And so it actually is more than one. So I think we'll want to do the test of, can it catch it if it only has like, does it catch it if it's value quantity in the component? Does it catch it if it's something else? Like a false failure. And then if like, is it giving us scuff if there's multiple component values? Okay. So here we are in the example. Here's our first value quantity. Here's our second value quantity. I don't think I have to have like nominate where it's showing up, but we'll see. Okay. Let's try to mess with this a little bit. So in both it's evaluating, so I wasn't expecting it to evaluate to false when we had the first component here. We can have an observation that only has one component value, right? There's not like a rule in place that you have to have more than one.
That's correct.
Okay, so, or sorry, yeah, because it's distinct components. Let's see.
It's probably a less common case, but it's legal.
Yep. We'll just see if we can put something towards it and just remove this guy. Okay, so now we should have one component with one value. Let's see if it evaluates to true. It does. Interesting. Okay. So, and to the point, Lorraine was saying, like, it's less common. The FHIR path that was written can evaluate correctly. Let's see if it goes to false when units of measure is. Oh, it's not then either. Oh, hold on, wait, I put it in the reference range. No wonder. Okay, 1 second. All right. Okay, good. Okay, so it can evaluate when there's one value quantity present or one component with value quantity, but it needs modification if to be able to catch the other piece, which is if there is more than one present. Which is this one. So what do we think we have to modify in order for it to target any component value that is of type this? Because I wasn't expecting it to actually. I figured that this would carry over to any, like anything that meets this criteria.
So the question from the business side, actually, if we really need to have the quantity, the specific data type to present to trigger this invariant, or you want the quantity dot the value as a trigger point.
Well, it's value quantity, because we want a value type quantity, right?
Then with that clearer business requirements, then we can review this expression.
You mean like remove the value? Because I don't know if it's going to change. Even if we did remove dot value, I don't know if it would actually change the outcome that we're experiencing right now, at least. We can try it.
Yeah, give it a try. I think we did that. To force its type.
Okay, so
Just remove the extra dot. Oh no, sorry, you need that. Never mind.
use component value of type. So yeah, still need the value dot system and component value of type dot system is expected to be units of measure. Let's try it. Okay, so this one still has two components. I'm just gonna check that, yeah, units of measure. Both are correct. So removing, why do we think that this is only targeting the first instance? Are there other scenarios that people have come across where you've had to basically like,
Well, doesn't that, when we have multiples, we're not specifically telling it to target the first instance, we're telling it to target any instance, and shouldn't it fire for each instance?
that's what I thought, unless we're missing something in the command that is supposed to provide that. Unless it's that, hold on. So it evaluates to false when there is more. Oh, this is even more interesting. So it's not that it's picking, like it's not firing and correctly picking up. Like in the scenario where we have two component values, it's not that if you supply a value quantity in the second one that doesn't have units of measure, that then it's a value. It's like it's not actually picking it up as like the warning. It's that even just the presence of a secondary quantity value causes the expression to say the rule has been broken, even though both technically meet the rule, right? Both have units of measure, both are value quantity, and yet it's saying in this sense, it's almost like neither are meeting the rule when it evaluates to false.
What you kind of need on there somehow is like a for each observation that matches that condition, do this. I don't know how you do that though.
Yeah, but some of these things, particularly like if it's like doing XPath, right? There's sets, unless you explicitly say you want one specific instance of the set, you're applying to sets. That's my understanding of how the evaluation works. Paul is more the expert than I am on this, but
Just my guess.
Yeah, and I'm fuzzier.
So I'm just guessing what I think it's doing is grabbing the set and then saying if any value in that set passes this, we're okay.
Yeah, which is not what we want. We actually want the inverse of that.
Right.
But I don't even think we're getting that, Randy, because in this case, both should be passing the requirement, but when there's more than one, it evaluates to false. So it's like the worst of the worst.
Do you mind let me hang on here. Let me take a picture of this.
I can also put it in the chat too.
Sure. And I'll raise that.
And here is I'll put forward the example GFR one.
Yeah, please.
And
Please show the link. That very important example.
yeah, and I think it's the estimated GFR. Yep. The comment that you had made, Thomas, in the chat. So I would say that it wouldn't be possible to have a single example message that meets any of our invariant tests, all of our invariant tests, because like to this one, we are modifying an example to make sure that we are testing both happy path and checking for failure scenarios.
Mhm.
And a lot of like some of our invariants are triggering off of codable concept, right? Value codable concept, observation.value codable concept. And then we also have an invariant that's supposed to trigger on observation value dot quantity, because a single example can't have two values for observation. We couldn't have a single example that tests both invariants, if that makes sense. And so,
Yeah, you'd might need to have multiple examples
Yeah.
often to test all your cases.
yep. And so like we can know, hey, these are the ones that we use to test this, but like a lot of times when we're going through this kind of refinement, we want to make sure we're choosing a good example for the test as opposed to just
Yeah.
throwing anyone against it.
We can, to their point, we can get to the point where for each invariant, which is basically each requirement, we have at least one, maybe more, because some of them may be happy path and some of them may be failure, examples, right?
Yes.
That are
Yep. That at some
a
point in
library.
time, yeah, worked for evaluating this.
Yeah, you
Yes.
need at least two, a happy path and then
A failure.
a failure. And the happy path may cover multiple happy paths,
Yes.
right? That example. But yeah, that's what you're doing in building a regression test suite.
Sorry, may I have just 1 minute to explain?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure.
Well, what I said is a general sample message as a base, or maybe I should have used it as base. Regarding the sample message, I do agree with you and go through each invariant test. We might need to provide different scenarios regarding the code value, regarding the absent existence and of the code attribute, element, and the value. But all those changes should be based on a one universal, or we call it the general sample message in that manner. From the testing perspective, if we go by the coding side, we always need some common resource, we call it, right? If you go to this way, you think about coding perspective, to test your code across a whole group. And then we go to the, I think it's called the deliverable phase. And then from that concept, from a coding programming perspective, that's why I bring this concept here. Doesn't mean this that we just stay with that specific general sample message without any derivation, without any change to do the test of this environments. Sorry, just stop here. Thank you.
And how, I'm trying to understand how, like,
Well, for example, and I don't know, just from a coding side, you have a module, right? You want to do the test, and you want to do the test on this module, code module. Definitely, you need to do some changes, right? For example, with this module, you want to chip in some code to identify something in that called black box. And doesn't mean that we test this module. We are now allowed to change any code or add in any code in this module. But everyone would like to test this module should use the common general module. Okay, this is one originally sitting here. You want to test this segment, copy one into your box or in your environment, do the changes, write down all the changes, and report it outcome. The second person focus on another, is still the same module for different perspective, copy that, make a copy and do your study, investigation, write down the report. So
I'm with you on
that
like
manner,
maintaining consistency of like, we always use the same message, but I think we're gonna need a couple examples, like observation results we'll probably need 4 examples that we may maintain consistently in the library.
regarding the baseline profile, that's what I
Yeah,
said.
regarding the baseline profile.
Yeah, and not just like go to any other website. So okay, this one can be utilized. Yeah, that can, but actually, which I doesn't mean it doesn't mean that it's not applicable, but just in case, if we, for example, here we say we test a component dot of value X, may naively we pick up one sample without a component, but directly with the value X. And then we never have a chance to get that invariant to passed. And then until we figure out, that's why I asked the sample size and length. So I go inside to ensure there is a component dot value X existing, sitting in that sample, and which is the profile that is being utilized to generate this sample. And so just try to avoid any non-necessary false alarm in that manner.
Mm-hmm. And so, like, I definitely think this one isn't a false alarm. This one is like a true, we need to correct this in order for it to evaluate correctly. And that we will want to maintain utilization of this example for this test. I'm just going to note it in. So it's because it, in the example, both component values, yeah. With units of measure. With values and systems of units of measure.org. Okay. Yeah, this one's a bit of a humdinger. Paul, you said you took a snapshot of it. I don't know if there's folks kind of on your end that you think could have an eye on it. I don't know.
I'll run it by Bryn.
Yeah, if we have like time to like go over like if there is like another modifier that we should be putting in, but it is definitely something that we want to take to our next profiling call, because it's not a problem with the one that we just did because it's not possible to have more than one value, but because you could have more than one value in the scenario where there's more than one component, we do have to make further tweaks to this. So I'm gonna just note it as a so Paul running by Bryn will return to tweak and test the invariant for better performance.
Right. So the issue here is that the invariant was attached to an array.
Yep.
And its behavior on the array is different than it would be if it was attached to a scalar. And what we really want to have is a NOR applied down the array, where this gets actually evaluated against every element in the array. And then the result gets we're looking for this to derive a true if it comes up, and so we want basically an OR applied all the way down across all the components.
We want to trigger the test for each member of the array.
And then get it. But do we want it to fire a warning? Yeah, actually, we want it fired for each element in the array because we want to get warning issued at the element level, not at the array level.
Yep.
Correct.
Okay, so that's what I'll discuss with them is how do we instruct or orchestrate that behavior if we can.
Yeah.
And see, that whole discussion just hits back on what I asked right at the start too, and that where you talk about different tests running these things. Like you say, you got the multiple states, you need the multiple test things. When you start making changes to profiles and you want to go back and test all these again, that's where that automated stuff comes back in.
That's why you need the regression suite. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where people like Touchstone would love to talk to you.
Mm-hmm.
Just the other thing is like we didn't actually test, so we tested this in FHIR Lab. There's another one that I have. Maybe it's FHIR Tester that I think is, I don't maybe it's the same and it's just this. We didn't actually try it in this, so I don't know if it's it could be the tooling, but I kind of doubt it. But we'll try it. Oh, maybe we have to just change something in this one. This one is a little bit more funky compared to this one. But
Yeah,
it could be a problem for 2 weeks from now.
And speaking of 2 weeks from now, are we holding the governance call next week?
We are. That's the 27th, correct?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, I will send my regrets in advance.
All right. Yeah, because I think in the same vein, we're gonna have a few folks that won't be able to join because they're traveling, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, HL7
Yeah.
is actually still going on. I'm gonna miss the Friday meetings.
Yeah, and like, what I'll say is like, I'll have to have a conversation with Mike. I don't think we'll have as many folks that join, but at the same time, we had to cancel the last governance call because we didn't have any coverage for it. So if there are topics that folks want to discuss, we do want to be able to provide that opportunity. But I'll have a talk with Mike about the agenda to just make sure that like we aren't doing anything that would be like a big motion or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. I will stop the